Park ranger in gray shirt and green pants standing in a small room in front of an elevator with gray sliding grates.
Hello, I'm Ranger Jim Bench. We're about to get in the elevator and go down 31 feet 8 inches to Delta-01 Launch Control Center. Come along.
Words: Minuteman Missile National Historic Site Online Resource Video Series, Ranger Jim Bench, Missileer 1971 to 1975. A round logo with a golden red rim. In a blue band, words Minuteman Missile NHS South Dakota. In the center, a Minuteman missile, an armored fist holding red bolts of lightning, and a silhouette of a soldier against red and white stripes. A beige building behind a large metal gate. People standing in front talking.
Hi, I'm Ranger Jim.
Park ranger in elevator closing the grates and pushing button.
I served in the Air Force as a missileer from 1971 to 1975.
A long room with green computer racks and 2 red chairs. Words Delta-01 Launch Control Center Tour. Elevator reaching bottom, ranger opening and closing the grates behind him as he steps out. A large room of concrete walls painted blue and white with pieces of artwork painted on the walls, a few lockers, and a large square concrete door.
The artwork that you see there was not here when I was on crew from 1971 to 75. This was painted in 1988 in anticipation of the fall of the Soviet Union. It depicts a Minuteman missile bursting through the Soviet Union flag. It's a red flag with a white missile going through it, marked with a USAF, United States Air Force, marking on it. To our right is our blast door, 16,000 pounds of steel and concrete. The artwork on it is known as blast door art. It's similar to nose art on an aircraft. It's a gray door with a red, white, and blue drawing on it. It says worldwide delivery in 30 minutes or less, or your next one is free. It looks a lot like Domino's pizza boxes. The purpose of this door was to protect the crew and the equipment inside. Only one of these doors could be open out of the 5 in the squadron. It had pins, 12 pins that were retracted and advanced by a hydraulic pump. Everything that we did to get this door open or closed was manual. There were no motors to assist us. Only one of these out of the 5 in the squadron could be open at a time to protect the crews inside from multiple attacks on multiple launch control centers. As you can see, the door is quite massive. It's about 3.5 feet thick, 3/4 inch steel plate sandwiched with concrete. To the right here, you have the No Loan Zone 2-man concept mandatory sign. What that meant, the No Loan Zone of the 2-man concept stated that anytime you're dealing with nuclear weapons, you have to have 2 persons trained in the task to be performed, both present and watching the other person. That was true here as long as the door was open, if the door were open, or if we had anybody but the on-duty crew inside and the door was closed. The safing, sealing, and locks in there protected us against any tampering by the crew member who was awake. Come on in, let's take a look.
Camera moves through a short concrete tunnel. Ranger standing on short metal bridge. A large metal box like a shipping container with a door in one end hangs from the ceiling of a gray metal capsule-shaped space.
The box you see here is called the acoustical enclosure. That's Air Force language for shipping container hanging from ceiling of capsule by chains and high-pressure shock absorbers. These were the ones that would absorb the shock for us and make it possible for us to survive a near-miss blast. Go in the Launch Control Center.
Long room with large green and gray computer racks lining the walls. A metal toilet in the corner behind curtains. 2 red chairs at desks, one on the side and one on the far end. Blue curtains hang around a bed.
As we enter the capsule, the first thing you notice on the right is our toilet. This is an improvement over the toilet we had back in the early 70s. This must have come in the 1980s. You'll notice also that we have 2 layers of privacy. These were put in when we got women on crew in 1988. We started out with 2 women on the crew, and then in 1989 they decided it wasn't fair to the women or to the men to have the women crewed together all the time. So they went to what was called a mixed gender crew, men and women together. It caused some excitement and some heartburn to begin with, but it quieted down after a while when people realized that it was not the end of the world as we know it. To the right we have communications, 3 different types of communications racks. We have our satellite communications there, which we did not have back when I was on crew. That was added later. The survivable low-frequency communications, this is submarine communications, very low frequency, waves that traveled at or below the surface of the land or water, 60-foot tall waves. We could not transmit on this, but we would receive it. Very accurate, but very slow. The receiver for it is that device at the deputy's eye level above their console there, a teleprinter. So that was the communications rack for that, and this was SACDIN, SAC Digital Information Network, which was also not here when I was here. On this side, we've got our emergency air conditioning unit, which would operate if the topside air conditioning unit failed or was taken out of commission. We had a snack area here, a refrigerator, a microwave oven. Back in my day, we had a toaster oven and an area to store our utensils and snacks, whatever. You'll notice the coffee pot here. 2 things about it. First of all, the size. Coffee was a huge commodity for us. Remember, I told you that one of us could sleep. Well, the person that had the tour from 4 o'clock in the morning till 9 or 10 for changeover in the morning, along about 5 o'clock in the morning, it got very, very difficult to stay awake. So the coffee was very, very valuable to us. You notice also it's very tightly strapped in there. We did not want any loose objects flying. If we were to get one of those shock waves coming through here during a war and start throwing pieces of equipment around, you didn't want to be taken out by your own coffee pot, in other words.
A desk with multiple control panels over it with buttons and switches, a red box with padlocks hanging over it.
This is the deputy commander's position. They would sit here anytime that both crew members were awake. If only one crew member was awake, they would sit at the commander's console. We'll talk about it in just a minute. The first thing that jumps into mind is the red box up here. That gets people's attention right away. There are 2 locks on it. The purpose behind having 2 locks is that no one knew the combination of anybody else's lock. So we could sleep without fear that the other person was playing with the authenticators, the sealed authenticators. These were devices we'd use to make sure that any execution message, any go-to-war message was authentic. In other words, it was from the president or their successor. Also in there were the launch keys. We didn't use red buttons to launch nuclear weapons. What we did, we had keys that were also located up in there. One key went in there at the deputy's console, by the deputy's console, and the other up at the launch control panel. We'll talk about it in just a few minutes. Those keys had to be turned within 2 seconds of each other to get one launch vote. It took 2 launch votes, 2 capsules out of the 5 to launch any one or all missiles in the squadron, all 50 missiles. The beauty of this is that we can sleep without fear the other person was playing with keys or playing with the sealed authenticators that were located in there. The enable panel here replaced the switches that we used to throw back in the Minuteman 1 days from 1963 to 1973. We armed the missile simply by breaking a little wire, lifting the cover, and throwing the switch. From 73 on, we had the Launch Enable Control Group signal panel, which was the enable panel. We had to get a code that we had no access to day to day to be able to actually arm the missiles. This is kind of like cocking the hammer on a single action pistol. You got to cock the pistol before you pull the trigger. This cocked the missiles, got them ready to fire. It released the safeties on the missiles, basically. Now, the communications panel itself, 10 rows of lights there. This corresponds to our 10 missiles in our flight, Delta-2 through 11, this being Delta-01 that we're in. If the security police or the maintainers who were out there needed to talk to Ellsworth Air Force Base, our home base, talk to their boss or whoever, they'd need to go through this SIN line because we could patch them in using our high-tech rotary device right there, and they could speak to whoever they needed to. Down below that, we have the hardened voice channel, the HVC. We could talk to all of the other launch control centers in the squadron, either one at a time or all together using the HVC. Security Control Center, HF, UHF, and VHF radios we could access right there. We had about 7 or 8 different means of communications that we could receive command control messages that would direct us to a higher state of readiness or to send us to war. This is the receive unit for the survivable low frequency system. This is submarine communications. There were transmitters that were 5 miles long, buried underground wires that would send out a 60-foot wave, radio wave that traveled at or below the surface of the land or the water. It was very, very reliable, but very slow. You didn't want to have this be the only way that you got your message, but it was a very, very valuable backup. Now, the book you see here is called Technical Orders. It's checklist. Virtually everything we did down here was done by a checklist. There's no oops and nukes. There's no mulligans in missiles. You didn't get a second chance to make it right. When you're handling nuclear weapons, you had to get it right the first time. And to ensure that, Strategic Air Command highly recommended the use of your checklist. Sound judgment always prevailed over checklists. But these checklists were so well thought out and so modified over the years that you were always better off using the checklist than trying to second guess them. The two things that we did not need a checklist for were toilet paper replacement and the pencil sharpener. To our right is our pride and joy. This is called the DSAP, the Data Store and Process. It's a digital computer with a magnetic core memory. The magnetic core memory is very important because it's logical that we would lose power during a nuclear war. When that happened, the motor generator, which is down below the floor here, would swap. The brushes would drop from AC to the DC side, and we'd be on the batteries, which lie underneath the deputy's chair here. When they did that, we had to get our status back immediately. We did not have time to wait for the computer to reboot. And that's where the magnetic core came in handy. It was a very powerful computer, a 1972 computer. This would monitor all 50 missiles in the squadron and give us an update on all 50 every 40 seconds. Now, compare that to the civilian world, computer capabilities. Atari had just come out with a new game called Pong. It was a ping pong game, if you don't remember it. But so it's obvious that the military was getting top-notch computers back in those days. Taking a closer look at this anti-sabotage device called the PES seal. We had about 10 of these, and they were very flimsy little seals that went over what were called critical components. You can see the residue on these 3 drawers in this rack. Critical components are those things that would arm or launch nuclear weapons. So these seals were checked at every changeover by the oncoming crew to make sure there were no cracks or breaks in them. With this computer, as I mentioned, we could monitor the status of all 50 missiles, anything that happened out, any status changes. We would get a printout, an alarm bell or buzzer, and light or lights on up at the MSIP, the Missile Status Indicator Panel, that blue board up at the commander's console, and we'll discuss it more here in just a few minutes. The equipment here was peripheral to the computer. If we'd like to step forward, we'll check out the bunk. We generally got anywhere from 6 to 8 hours of rest or sleep a night. The straps are not to hold our bodies in. They're to keep the mattress from flying off and hitting the deputy in the head in case of a shock wave coming through. It's a lot fancier than the one that we had back in the early 70s. And another couple of examples of improvements they made along the way were the acoustic padding on the ceiling to cut down the noise a little bit, and the commercial carpeting on the floor, which replaced chipped, highly polished linoleum squares back in my day. Let's step forward to the commander's console.
A desk with multiple control panels over it with buttons and switches. A blue panel with multiple rows of lights that light up different colors. A mirror above it, and a green box with a TV inside.
This is the MSIP. There are 10 rows of lights here, one each for the 10 missiles in our flight, Delta 2 through 11, this being Delta-01 once again. Any change in the status would result in an alarm bell, printout, buzzer, and lighter lights coming on here. That would direct us into our checklist, and we would report the information that we had to Job Control for them to decide what sort of maintenance team they needed to send out to fix it. This is the Missileer's dream, called Clean and Green, where we have all 10 lights up there and no faults, no security alarms or anything like that. Once again, we have the same communications panel down here for the commander that we had for the deputy. Some differences, though. This is your control panel for your high frequency, your ultra high frequency, how we talk to the airborne command post once a week. The airborne would test every one of our 50 missiles in the squadron, all 1,000 missiles, Minuteman wide, every week from the air to make sure they could reach the missiles. If the launch crews were destroyed, the airborne command post could come in, take over, and launch the missiles. If the launch crews were destroyed, if they gave us permission, or if all the cables going to a particular missile were cut, we would take over and launch them using that UHF radio signal. This is the UHF control there that would put us on the right channel for them. The most important speakers we've got in the capsule are the primary alerting system speakers, both from Headquarters Strategic Air Command, the underground and the airborne, and Numbered Air Force Headquarters, which were located and it alternated between Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana and March Air Force Base in California. We would get about 18 messages or tests of that primary alerting system throughout a 24-hour period. They were preceded by a warble tone, which sounds like this. And then a message, usually the test messages would say something like, Skybird, this is the SAC Airborne Command Post with a test of the primary alerting system, ring bowl over, low tide over, looking glass out. We would acknowledge it to the Squadron Command Post. Squadron Command Post would acknowledge to the Wing Command Post and to the alternate command post, and then they would advise SAC that we had all gotten the message. The launch key for the commander was located to the right of the commander's console. It had to be turned within 2 seconds of the deputy's key turn to give you one valid launch command. It took 2 capsules, 2 valid launch commands to launch any one up to all 50 of the missiles. Things that we did not have back when I was on crew, we did not have a commercial TV, and we did not have an AM/FM radio and cassette player. So if it's 11 o'clock at night and your partner is asleep, and you don't play solitaire, you don't do any card games, you gave up needlepoint, and you left your banjo at home, what can you be doing down here at 11 o'clock at night on a Friday night? Well, the answer is reading. A lot of us, 50% of us roughly, got an advanced degree, a master's degree down here, free or cheap. You could work on professional military education, take Air Command and Staff Air War College, Squadron Officer School down here. A lot of us completed that. Or you could read for pleasure. If you weren't a reader, this could be a really tough assignment for 4 years. Once a missile received 2 valid launch votes, it would ultimately respond by going into what's called terminal countdown. Terminal countdown took less than a minute, and this is how it would have gone. Okay? Enabled, and that would be enabled all the way across the board, all missiles at the same time. Launch commanded, 1 launch vote has been received. Launch in process, 2 launch votes received. Interzone security, when the 90-ton launcher closure door separates and starts rolling back away from the missile, you get an interzone security light. And then outer zone is the radar picks up the movement of that door. And then ultimately, missile stage 1 fires, and as it lifts up, it separates the lower umbilical, and you get a missile away light. As the missiles launched, we'd make a grease pencil mark down through each one, so if we lost power, we would know which missiles had launched. We'd make our launch report to the airborne command post, to the base command post, or to the alternate command post, Kilo, which is just north of Spearfish. We'd be buckling in also at this time, tightening down our seat belts, even tighter than they were before, waiting for incoming Soviet weapons, and whack. We get smacked with one of those 10 megaton bombs. We're thrashing around here, going stop to stop on the shock isolators there, and the paneling, acoustic paneling is falling down around us there, and dust is settling in. But what happens is they hit wall drug, destroying the world's finest collection of jackalopes. But we're still alive. But the bad news is, more than likely, either the building topside is collapsed and is down in the elevator shaft, or the elevator shaft itself has been destroyed and it's blocking our way out. Are we doomed to be entombed and found by archaeologists 2,000 years from now? Maybe not. We have an escape hatch right up here. It's a 544-pound steel door which leads to a 3-foot corrugated steel tube filled with sand, and it ends 5 feet below the surface out between the little culvert and the flagpole. I hand him the wrench there, and he hops up there and starts wrenching away on the retaining strap on that huge door. We know it's very dangerous. Those doors have not been opened from the inside ever, any of the 100 original ones that were built. So after a number of minutes there, the door releases and it flops back and the sand comes pouring out. It goes down between the acoustical enclosure here, the launch control center, and the wall of the capsule, so it's not pouring in on us. And my deputy is up there with a shovel, and he's shoveling away at that, and I've got to decide, what do we need down here? We're going to need air, we're going to need water, and what else? We're going to need food. Okay. Well, the food and the water are under the panel here, the floor panel, along with a number of other things like first aid kits, flashlights, inflatable pillows. We've got a Geiger counter probably, but no protective suits. So if we get topside there, we're going to be in whatever clothing we're in. So we want to back off the speed on getting out of here a little bit. We've got 7 days of everything we need, including air. We've got an oxygen regeneration unit back in the back by those 2 black cases, potassium superoxide canisters, and a blower that's hand activated. You have to crank that thing 2 hours out of 24 to suck the CO2 out of the air and replace it with oxygen. So we get that set up, and I'm cranking on that, and my deputy's up there digging away, and then I'm digging, and he's cranking. About 4 days later, he pops out by the flag, calls down, and we head back to Ellsworth to see what's left.
Online resource video series Minuteman Missile National Historic Site featuring Jim Bench, Park Ranger, Missileer 1971 to 1975. Video created and edited by Emily Watson. www.nps.gov/MIMI. Minuteman Missile National Historic Site.